The gunshot punched through the ceiling tiles and dropped a shower of white dust onto the emergency room floor. 30 people froze. The fluorescent lights hummed. Somewhere behind the nurse's station, a heart monitor beeped 3 times and went silent. Amara Osei-Mensah, 3 months into her first real nursing job, still fumbling with the electronic charting system, still apologizing every time she bumped into a gurney, dropped behind the counter, and felt something cold shift in her left scrub pocket, a challenge coin. Wami's challenge coin. And in the space between one heartbeat and the next, the rookie nurse that Veterans Memorial Hospital had been laughing about for 12 weeks disappeared. What replaced her was something no one in that building was ready for. There's a particular way that Veterans Memorial Hospital in Boston smells at 6:00 in the morning. Floor wax and instant coffee, and something older underneath, the kind of antiseptic that's been soaking into brick walls since the Korean War. The building sits on a hill overlooking the harbor, old and stubborn and underfunded. And on clear mornings, you can see the masts of the USS Constitution from the 3rd floor breakroom window. Amara loved that view. She'd stand there with her thermos of 2 strong Gannon coffee. Not the watery stuff from the machine, but the real thing her father shipped in from a shop in D.C., and she'd watch the harbor wake up. Tugboats, seagulls, the Constitution sitting quiet and perfect in its berth at Charlestown Navy Yard. She never told anyone why that ship made her chest ache. At 34, Amara Osei-Mensah was the newest, youngest, and by a comfortable margin, the most uncertain nurse in the emergency department. She wore scrubs a size too large, kept her natural hair cropped close enough to require no maintenance, and had a habit of apologizing for things that weren't her fault. Sorry. Excuse me. Sorry. Was that your pen? I'm sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize you were. The other nurses had noticed. Of course they had. In a VA hospital staffed by people who'd spent decades dealing with trauma, with bureaucracy, with a particular brand of institutional madness that comes from caring for veterans while being slowly strangled by budget cuts. A soft-spoken rookie who flinched at raised voices stood out like a civilian at a military ball. Kid couldn't start an IV on a garden hose, one of the techs said in the break room. Not quietly enough. Amara heard. She always heard. 12 years of training had made her ears a precision instrument capable of distinguishing the click of a rifle safety from 50 yards in a sandstorm. But she'd smile and duck her head and go back to her charting. And nobody thought twice about it. Nobody except Rita Sandoval. Master Chief Sandoval, retired, 68 years old, volunteer front desk coordinator, had been watching Amara since her first shift, not watching the way the other nurses watched with skepticism or amusement. Watching the way someone studies a puzzle they haven't quite solved. It was the exits. Every time Amara entered a room, her eyes swept left to right, then up, then back to center. She mapped windows, doors, choke points. She did it in under 3 seconds. And she did it so naturally that you'd miss it entirely if you weren't looking for it. Rita was looking for it because Rita had done the same thing every day for 30 years aboard Navy vessels. And she recognized the behavior the way a musician recognizes perfect pitch instinctively and with absolute certainty. But the old Master Chief said nothing. She just watched and she waited. The one person who gave Amara genuine warmth was improbably the most difficult patient in the hospital. Gunnery Sergeant Raymond Delroy, USMC, retired, had been recovering from lumbar fusion surgery for 2 weeks, and had already driven 3 nurses to request reassignment. He was 58, built like a brick wall that had been slightly softened by age and hospital food, and he spoke in the flat, carrying voice of a man who had spent decades making himself heard over helicopter rotors and gunfire. "Hey, new girl." Amara turned. Ray was in his wheelchair by the window. A cold cup of coffee balanced on his armrest. A crossword puzzle he'd been butchering for 3 days spread across his lap. "Yes? Gunnery Sergeant. What's a 9-letter word for stubborn?" "Obstinate." He squinted at her. "How old are you? Enough to drive?" "I'm 34. 34. He shook his head like she'd told him she was 12. "My boots are older than you. Come here and fix my IV. The last kid they sent and nearly put it in my kneecap." She fixed his IV in 12 seconds flat. Inserted it so smoothly he didn't feel the needle. Ray looked at the insertion site, looked at her. Something flickered behind his eyes, a question forming. But then a monitor beeped 2 rooms down, and Amara was gone before he could ask it. In her left pocket, a heavy brass coin pressed against her thigh with each step. She'd carried it every day for 5 years. On one side, a trident and an anchor. On the other, engraved initials K.A. She never took it out. She never talked about it. But sometimes late in a shift when the ER was quiet, and the patients were sleeping, and the hum of the old building settled into her bones, Amara would hum low and soft a lullaby. Her grandmother sang in a craw about a child who crossed a great river and found a new home on the other side. She didn't know anyone could hear her. Ray could hear her. From his room down the hall, he'd lie still and listen, and he'd think, I know that sound. That's not just singing. That's someone keeping themselves together. But what did he know? He was just a broken-down gunnery sergeant with a bad back and a crossword puzzle he couldn't finish. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that by this time next week, the woman they called the new girl would have the entire emergency room on its feet. The Monday before everything changed, Amara made the mistake of telling the truth. It happened during a morning staff meeting. The kind of airless fluorescent lit gathering where hospital administration pretended to care about frontline concerns and the frontline pretended to believe them. 15 nurses packed into a conference room that smelled like stale donuts and dry erase markers. Denise Kowalski ran the meeting. She always ran the meeting, at 55. Denise was the senior ER nurse, the union representative, and the unofficial gatekeeper of Veterans Memorial's emergency department. She had 30 years of seniority, a badge lanyard thick with credentials, and a way of looking at new nurses that made them feel like they'd tracked mud onto a freshly mopped floor. Supply requests, Denise said, flipping a page on her clipboard. We're still waiting on the level 1 infuser replacement parts and the updated crash cart medications. Moving on. Actually, Amara's voice was so quiet that 3 people had to turn around to see who'd spoken. I wanted to ask about the supply shortages in the ER. We've been low on basic trauma supplies for 6 weeks now. We ran out of chest seals last Thursday. The room went still, not because the question was inappropriate, because Amara had asked it. The new girl, the one who apologized for breathing, Denise's pen stopped moving. She looked at Amara the way a cat looks at a mouse that has just walked out of its hole and sat down on the kitchen counter. We filed the requisitions through proper channels. Denise said, these things take time. 6 weeks is a long time to be short on chest seals in a trauma-capable ER. Are you questioning the supply chain process, Miss Osei-Mensah? The pronunciation came out wrong, deliberate or not. It sounded like she'd garbled the name on purpose. Amara felt her jaw tighten. A micro-reaction she buried instantly. I'm not questioning the process. I'm saying the process isn't working. We had 2 GSWs last week, and I had to improvise occlusive dressings with you improvised medical equipment. Denise's eyebrows rose without authorization. That's a compliance issue. The patient was coding. I'll need to document this. Thank you for bringing it to our attention. And just like that, the conversation was over. Amara sat down around her. The other nurses carefully avoided eye contact, the universal signal of people who agreed with her, but weren't about to say so. After the meeting, Amara found herself in the stairwell that led to the administrative offices. She hadn't planned to go there, but the words were still burning in her chest. And the stairwell felt safer than the ER, and her feet carried her upward before her brain could intervene. Gerald Whitcomb's office was on the 4th floor. The hospital's board chairman kept a part-time office there, mahogany desk, leather chair, a window view that probably cost more than Amara's annual salary and maintenance alone. The walls were covered in framed photographs, Whitcomb shaking hands with senators, Whitcomb at ribbon-cutting ceremonies, Whitcomb in a golf shirt with the governor. In every photo, he was smiling. In every photo, there was a veteran somewhere in the background positioned like a prop. Mr. Whitcomb, I'm sorry to bother you. Come in. He waved without looking up from his laptop. He was 63, silver-haired, expensive suit, the kind of tan that came from golf courses and not from deployments. What can I do for you, sweetheart? Sweetheart. Amara's back straightened half an inch before she caught herself. Sir, I'm a nurse in the ER. I've been trying to address some critical supply shortages. The supply issue, right? He leaned back, fingers laced over his stomach. Listen. What's your name again? Amara Osei-Mensah, right? Listen, Amara. I understand the frustration, but we're in a budget transition. The board has approved a major capital project, the Whitcomb Veterans Wellness Center, and we need to prioritize spending during the construction phase. The Wellness Center. You're building a wellness center while the ER runs out of chest seals. Whitcomb's smile tightened. Just a fraction. Nurses don't understand budgets. That's not a criticism. It's just your job as patient care. My job is the big picture. And the big picture sometimes requires hard choices about where money goes. Sir, with respect, the ER security system hasn't been updated in. The metal detector at the main entrance is being repaired. His voice dropped half a degree. It's on the schedule. It's been broken for a month. These things take time. The same words Denise had used. The exact same words. Is there anything else? There was so much else. There was a whole building full of veterans waiting in hallways because there weren't enough beds. Nurses doubling shifts because there wasn't enough staff. An ER that smelled like floor wax because that was cheaper than fixing the ventilation system. But Amara recognized the wall when she hit it. She'd spent 12 years recognizing walls. No, sir. Thank you for your time. She was almost through the door when he called after her. Oh, and Amara, a word of advice. He smiled the way a man smiles when he knows exactly how much power he has. Rookies are easy to replace. Keep your head down, do your job, and let the people who understand how this place works handle the rest. She walked back to the ER with her fingernails cutting crescent into her palms. That afternoon, she found a written warning in her inbox. Denise had filed it. Failure to follow medication documentation protocol. The incident she was citing had happened 2 weeks ago. A minor charting delay during a code blue. The kind of thing that happens to every nurse and is usually addressed with a verbal reminder. Amara stared at the warning. Then she stared at the ER, at the broken equipment, the exhausted staff, the veterans sitting in plastic chairs waiting for a system that had already given up on them. She thought about quitting. She'd done it before. She was good at walking away. She'd walked away from 12 years. From a team. From a name that used to mean something in places most Americans couldn't find on a map. In her pocket, Wami's coin sat heavy and still. She didn't quit. Not yet. But that night, alone in her apartment in Dorchester, she didn't hum the lullaby. She sat in silence and stared at the wall. And the wall stared back, and neither of them had anything useful to say. The nightmare came back on Tuesday night, the way it always did when she was stressed. Niger 2017, the Tongo region. The ambush hit at 11:40 in the morning. One moment they were moving through scrub brush in a loose formation, and the next the world became noise and dust, and the particular cracking sound that 7.62 rounds make when they pass close enough to feel the heat. In the dream, it happened the way it had happened. SEAL Team 8 separated from their support element. 4 operators and 1 combat medic pinned down in a dry riverbed, while 50+ militants swept the area. The other 3 teams were engaged a kilometer east. No air support for 40 minutes. No extraction for 11 hours. Amara Senior Chief Petty Officer Osei-Mensah calls sign Cobra kept 2 critically wounded operators alive in that river bed with a field surgery kit, 2 bags of saline, a tourniquet she made from her own belt, and a steadiness in her hands that defied every law of human biology. She performed a needle decompression on a collapsed lung, while bullets kicked up dirt 60 from her head. She packed a femoral wound with hemostatic gauze, and held pressure for 90 minutes while talking calmly, steadily about nothing. About the Red Sox. About the terrible show at Camp Lemonnier. About how Petty Officer First Class Asante owed her $40 from a poker game and she intended to collect. Was 10 feet away, returning fire from behind a termite mound, laughing between bursts. You'll get your money when we get out of this, Cobra. Both wounded operators survived. They were extracted at 2:47 hours. Wami was not extracted. Wami was carried. He'd taken a round through the neck during the final push to the extraction point. A through, and through that severed the carotid artery. Amara held him in the back of the helicopter, with both hands on his throat, and watched the light leave his eyes, somewhere over the Sile. Petty Officer First Class Asante, 29 years old, born in Silver Spring, Maryland, to Ghanaian immigrants. The only other person in SEAL Team 8 who understood what it meant to carry 2 countries in your chest. The man who gave her his challenge coin the morning of the ambush and said, "Auntie Nana, let's go." She woke at 30 ordered a.m. gasping, hands in the wrong position, cupped as if she were still holding his neck. It took 4 minutes for her heart rate to drop below 100. She didn't go back to sleep. Instead, she sat on the edge of her bed in the apartment that still didn't feel like home, and she held Kwami's coin. and she thought about all the ways a person can be alive and still not be living. She'd left the Navy 14 months after Whammy died. They'd offered her the instructor billet at Little Creek. Teach the next generation of SEAL combat medics. Pass on everything she knew. She lasted 2 days. Every student had Kwame's face. Every training scenario was the riverbed. So she ran Ghana. First Kumasi, her parents' hometown, where she worked in a rural clinic for a year and delivered 14 babies and treated malaria and Dini and remembered what medicine felt like when it wasn't about keeping people alive long enough for extraction. Then back to the States, nursing school, a new name on a new badge in a new city. But you can't outrun training. You can't unhear the sounds. You can't unsee the way a room breaks down into sectors and sight lines or unfeepen you haven't held in 3 years, but could still field strip blindfolded, and you can't stop scanning exits. Rita Sandoval knew that. Amara knew that. Rita knew there was an understanding between them. The kind of understanding that doesn't require words, only recognition. On Wednesday morning, Amara almost quit for real. Denise had posted the weekly schedule. Amara had been moved again from the trauma bay rotation to triage desk duty. 4th time in 6 weeks. Triage desk was where they put the nurses they didn't trust with real patients. Denise, I was hoping to get more trauma bay time. My skills assessment. Your skills assessment is fine on paper. Denise didn't look up from her computer. But I need experienced hands in the trauma bay. When you've been here longer than a semester, we'll talk. I've been here 3 months, like I said. Now, Denise looked up. Her eyes were polished steel, professional, and impenetrable. When you've been here longer, Omar walked to the break room. She poured coffee she didn't want. She stared out the window at the harbor, at the Constitution, and she thought, I don't belong here. I don't belong anywhere. 9, letter word for stubborn. She turned. Ray was in the doorway, wheelchair chair blocking the entire frame, crossword in his lap. I already told you, obstinate. Doesn't fit, it's 9 letters. Obsa-inate. I know how to spell it, it doesn't fit the crosses. He wheeled himself in, studied her face. You look like hell. Thanks, don't mention it. He poured himself a coffee. A complicated operation involving one hand on the pot, and the other bracing his wheelchair. You know what my drill instructor told me at Paris Island 35 years ago? I don't know, he said. Delacroix, the Corps doesn't care if you're having a bad day. Neither does the enemy. So, you can feel sorry for yourself, or you can square your shoulders and get back in the fight. But you can't do both. He took a sip of his terrible coffee. Sound advice. Terrible man got hit by a bus in Jacksonville in '94. He paused. The bus was fine. Against her will. Amara laughed. A real laugh, short and sudden and surprised. The kind that escapes before you can stop it. Ray grinned. There she is. I knew there was a person in there somewhere. She looked at him, this battered, impossible Marine in his wheelchair with his crossword and his bad jokes and his complete refusal to let anyone around him stay miserable. And for 1 second, she almost told him, almost said, I was SEAL Team 8 and my best friend died in my arms, and I've been trying to be nobody for 3 years and it's not working. But the moment passed. It always passed. Get back to your room, Gunnery Sergeant. She said, your physical therapy is in 20 minutes. Yes, Mom. He saluted casual, sloppy, the Marine version of a wink, and wheeled himself out in her pocket. The coin pressed against her thigh. Cold, patient waiting. Tuesday morning. The worst kind of Tuesday, flu season overflow. 3 ambulances backed up. A water main break on the 2nd floor that had everyone on edge. Amara was juggling 6 patients, running between triage and intake, trying to keep her charting current, while Denise monitored her every keystroke with the focus of a hawk tracking a field mouse. Upstairs, Gerald Whitcomb was in a board meeting, presenting revised budgets for the Veterans Wellness Center. The PowerPoint was beautiful. The numbers were fiction. In the ER waiting room, the usual crowd. Old Korean War veteran named Harold Park, there for his blood pressure check, reading a folded newspaper with arthritic hands. PFC Darius Webb, 22 Army. Sitting in the corner, with his knee bouncing and his eyes fixed on a point that only he could see in for his 3rd panic attack this month. 2 Vietnam vets playing chess on a magnetic board. A woman with a toddler, the toddler with a fever. And Gunnery Sergeant Raymond Delacroix parked in his wheelchair by the intake window. There for a post-surgical follow, up and passing the time by loudly critiquing the crossword puzzle's editorial standards. Nocturnal bird of prey, 5 letters. That's all it. but they gave me an H in the second position. What kind of OLED starts with an H? Amara didn't answer. She was watching the main entrance. Not consciously, the way you don't consciously breathe. She watched every entrance, every time, the way she'd watched entrances for 12 years in places where not watching meant dying. The metal detector at the front door had been broken for 31 days. At Al-Hunhay 47, 4 men in gray work coveralls walked through it. The first man, tall, mid-40s, close-cropped hair and steady hands, flashed a maintenance badge at the unarmed security guard. The guard glanced at it, nodded, and went back to his phone. The badge was fake. But in a VIA hospital running on fumes and duct tape, where maintenance workers came and went like ghosts, nobody questioned a badge in a pair of coveralls. They were tenfed inside the ER when the first man pulled a Glock 19 from under his coveralls and fired one round into the ceiling. The sound was enormous. In a building designed for healing, the concussive report of a 9mm handgun was an obscenity, a physical force that slammed through the room and turned every head and stopped every heart. Ceiling dust rained down, white, fine, almost gentle. Nobody moves. The man's voice was controlled, practiced. We're here for the pharmacy. Stay calm and nobody gets hurt. For 2 seconds, the room obeyed. Shocked as that. It creates a window of absolute compliance, a gap between stimulus and response where the human brain simply stops processing and waits for instructions. Then Harold Park, 70 years old, Korean War, chosen reservoir. A man who'd been cold and shot at before most of the people in that room were born. Stood up from his plastic chair. Sit down, old man. Harold didn't sit down. Harold Park hadn't sat down when the Chinese came over the hill in 1950, and he wasn't about to start now. The gunman pistol whipped him. The old veteran went down hard, blood erupting from a gash above his eye, his newspaper scattering across the linoleum like dead leaves. Darius Webb, PFC Web 22, Army PTSD, panic attacks. The war following him into a VIA hospital waiting room like a dog that wouldn't stop biting lunged from his chair. A second gunman fired. The round caught Darius in the left shoulder. Through and through, he spun and hit the floor. And the sound he made wasn't a scream. It was the sound of a man who'd heard that sound before in a different country, in a different life, and was suddenly back there. Chaos, people screaming. The woman clutching her toddler, pressing the child's face into her chest. Dr. Thomas Aguilar, the ER, attending, 31 years old, brilliant on paper. Frozen solid in the real, standing behind the nurse's station with his hands at his sides and his mouth open and absolutely nothing coming out. And Amara dropped behind the nurse's station counter. Not dove, not fropped, controlled, deliberate. The smooth downward motion of someone who'd been under fire before and understood that the first 3 seconds determine whether you live or die. Her back against the counter, her breathing, even her eyes open. In her left pocket, Wami's challenge coin shifted against her thigh. For 3 seconds, she was nobody. She was the gap between who she'd been and who she'd been pretending to be. Then the coin settled and something that had been sleeping for 3 years opened its eyes. She didn't become a different person. She became herself. Her eyes swept left. 4 men, 2 in the ER, 2 moving toward the pharmacy corridor. The ER pair. 1 by the door, Glock 19, trigger disciplined, pour 1 center room. Bed of M9, hands shaking, nervous, undisciplined. The 2 headed for pharmacy. Out of sight now, moving fast, rounds fired 2. Ammunition remaining in the Glock, likely 14. The Beretta, unclear exits. Main entrance blocked by gunman 1. Back corridor clear. Pharmacy corridor, gunman 3 and 4. Stairwell 30ft east. Partially concealed by supply cart. She processed this in under 5 seconds. Nobody saw her do it. Nobody was looking at the rookie nurse. But Gunnery Sergeant Ray Delroy, wheelchair-bound and helpless and watching from 10th away, saw her eyes change, and he thought, I've seen those eyes before on the firing range, on patrol, in the places where people stop being people and become something sharper. Who the hell are you? Amara moved low, fast, silent across the floor to Darius Webb, who was on his back, left shoulder pumping blood, eyes wide, and somewhere else entirely. Not in Boston, not in the ER, back in Kandahar or Helmand or wherever the bullet had sent him. Soldier. Her voice was a whisper. But it carried a frequency that Darius's nervous system recognized before his conscious mind could process it. The calm, absolute command of someone who has talked wounded men through worse. Look at me. In through the nose, out through the mouth. You're safe. I've got you. His eyes found hers, locked on. His breathing stuttered, then steadied. She examined the wound in 3 seconds. Through and through, lateral deltoid. No arterial involvement. No bone. He'd live. She took a pen from her scrub pocket, wrapped a strip torn from her own scrub top around it, and fashioned a pressure bandage with a technique that hadn't been taught in any nursing program in the country. Because it wasn't a nursing technique. It was a special operations combat medic technique designed for field application under fire. And she performed it with the fluid, automatic precision of someone who'd done it 100 times in conditions that made this look like a vacation. "Keep pressure here," she whispered. "Don't move. Don't make a sound." Darius nodded. His breathing was steady now. She'd given him something to focus on. The pressure, the breathing, and the panic had nowhere to go. She moved to Herald Park. The old Korean War veteran was on the floor, bleeding from the gash on his forehead but conscious. His eyes were clear and hard, and when Amara knelt beside him, he grabbed her wrist with a grip that had 70 years of stubbornness behind it. "I'm okay," he hissed. "Help the others." She pressed a folded gauze pad against his wound, guided his hand to hold it, and moved on. The 2 gunmen in the ER hadn't noticed her. They were focused on the room, on the screaming, on the chaos, on the woman with the toddler, on the frozen doctor, on the chess-playing Vietnam vets who'd gone silent and watchful with the particular stillness of men who'd been ambushed before and knew that stillness was survival. Amara reached the back corridor. The door was unlocked. It was always unlocked, a fire code violation that Whiteham's budget cuts had never addressed. She opened it 6 in. Then she began evacuating patients. One by one, hand on a shoulder, whisper in an ear, a gesture, 2 fingers pointed toward the corridor, then a flat palm. "Move that way. Stay low." It was a tactical hand signal standardized across every branch of special operations in the U.S. military. Dr. Aguilar didn't recognize it. He stared at her gestures with the blank confusion of a man watching someone speak a language he'd never heard. But the veterans, the Vietnam vets, the younger Iraq vets, the Afghanistan vets who'd been waiting for prescriptions and blood draws, and the slow machinery of government health care, they recognized it instantly. One by one, they moved, silent, disciplined, down the corridor toward the loading dock, away from the guns. And Ray Delacree, who couldn't move, who was in a wheelchair with a spine held together by titanium screws and surgical tape, watched from his position near the intake window, and saw everything. He saw her check corners the way SEAL operators check corners, slicing the pie, they called it. A technique for clearing angles of approach 1 degree at a time. He saw her check her 6, glancing behind her at regular intervals. A combat habit so deeply ingrained it was automatic. He saw her position her body between the patients and the gunmen. Always between, always in the line of fire. The way an operator shields their principal. And Ray Delroy, who had spent 20 years in the United States Marine Corps, who had trained alongside Navy SEALs in 3 theaters of war, who knew the difference between a scared civilian moving fast and a combat-trained operator moving with purpose, mouthed 3 words that no one heard. "What team?" Amara got 11 people out before Marcus Devlin noticed. Devlin was smart. Ex-Army medic, dishonorably discharged, but trained enough to read a room and realize it was emptier than it should have been. He turned from the pharmacy corridor and saw the back door closing. He moved fast, grabbed the nearest body, Denise Kowalski, who'd been crouching behind the triage desk, too terrified to move, her union credentials and 30 years of seniority suddenly useless in the face of a man with a gun. "Nobody else leaves." Devlin pressed the Glock against Denise's temple. His hand was steady. His eyes were not. "Bring them back." Now the room froze again. The seconder gunman, younger, more nervous, swung his Beretta in a wide arc that covered half the room and endangered everyone. Amara stepped out from behind the supply cart. The air in the room changed. There is a specific quality to the way a special operator occupies space and economy of movement. A centered gravity, a stillness that is not passive but loaded like a spring compressed to its maximum tolerance. Amara had been hiding it for 3 months. She stopped hiding it now. She stood in the center of the ER 5'7" in tall, scrubs torn where she'd ripped fabric for Darius's bandage, and she looked at Marcus Devlin with eyes that had seen men like him in 6 countries across 2 continents. "You're holding that weapon wrong." Her voice. God, her voice. Nobody in that hospital had heard this voice. It was flat and calm, and carried the absolute authority of someone who does not make requests because they do not need to. Devlin blinked. Your finger is on the trigger guard, not the trigger. She took one step closer. That means you don't want to shoot her. So, let's talk. Get back or you'll what? You came for pills, not bodies. You're running a pharmacy job with a crew of 4, 2 of whom are in the back right now, probably wondering why it's taking so long. You picked this hospital because the security is garbage and the metal detector's broken. That tells me you're smart. Smart people don't kill hostages. It creates problems they can't solve. She was reading him, peeling him open with words and eye contact, and the kind of tactical psychology they teach at Coronado to people whose job is to walk into impossible situations and walk out alive. Devlin's gun hand trembled. Half an inch, barely visible. Amara saw it. She moved 8 seconds. That's how long it took. She closed the distance in 2 steps. Redirected the weapon with her left hand. A hard strike to the inside of Devlin's wrist that broke his grip, caught the Glock as it fell. Dropped the magazine with her thumb, racked the slide to clear the chamber, and set the empty weapon on the floor. All before Devlin's back hit the linoleum. SEAL close quarters combat. Krav Maga Foundation adapted for special operations. Fast, brutal, efficient. Every Marine in that room recognized it. The second gunman raised his Beretta. Before Amara could turn, a forked aluminum IV pole came spinning through the air like a javelin. It struck the gunman's forearm with a crack that echoed through the ER, and the Beretta clattered to the floor. Gunnery Sergeant Raymond Delcroix, wheelchair-bound. 2 weeks post-spinal surgery, in violation of every medical restriction his surgeon had given him. Had thrown it from Tempt away with the precision of a man who'd once placed 3rd in the Marine Corps combat skills competition. Amara was on the second gunman in 2 seconds. He went down. She zip-tied both men's wrists with their own zip ties, which she'd taken from Devlin's pocket in the same motion as the disarm. Then she pulled a cell phone from behind the nurse's station, slid it to a nurse near the back corridor, and spoke in tactical brevity codes, descriptions, weapon types, positions of the 2 pharmacy gunmen, that the 911 dispatcher on the other end, an ex-Marine named Torres, understood immediately and relayed to Boston PD SWAT. Both pharmacy gunmen surrendered 11 minutes later without a shot fired. The ER went silent. Silence has a weight in an emergency room. It's unnatural. A room designed for alarms and monitors, and the constant percussion of people being kept alive, doesn't know what to do with quiet. The fluorescent lights buzz louder. The clock on the wall ticks like a countdown. 30 people stared at Amara Osei-Mensah. She was standing in the center of the room. Scrubs torn. Right forearm exposed, the 3 parallel scars she'd always called a cooking accident visible under the harsh fluorescent light. They weren't from cooking. They were from a black-necked, spitting cobra in a dry riverbed in Niger. And the 2 lines flanking the bite were from the field sutures she'd put in herself while her team held a perimeter around her neck on a thin chain that had been tucked inside her scrub top. A brass challenge coin hung in the open air. It had fallen free during the fight. The trident caught the light. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was controlled. She looked nothing like the nervous rookie who'd been apologizing her way through shifts for 3 months. Nobody spoke. The buzzing lights, the ticking clock, the distant sound of sirens approaching. Then Ray Delacroix moved. He gripped the wheels of his chair. His face was white. The throw had cost him. Pulled something in his back that his surgeon was going to be very unhappy about. But his eyes were focused with a clarity that cut through everything. He wheeled himself forward until he was 3 from Amara. That wasn't nursing school, he said. His voice was quiet. In a room of 30 silent people, it carried like a bell. That was SEAL CQC, close quarters combat. I've trained with team guys. I deployed with team guys. I know what I just saw. Amara didn't respond. She was looking at the coin in her hand. She'd closed her fist around it without realizing. What team? Rai asked. The question hung in the air like smoke. Every veteran in that room was leaning in. Harold Park, blood still drying on his forehead, his newspaper forgotten. The Vietnam vets, chess game abandoned. Darius Webb, shoulder bandaged with a combat medic's improvised dressing, sitting upright against the wall with wide eyes. A galar who'd been useless during the crisis and knew it, and would spend the rest of his career making up for it. The nurses, the techs, Denise Kowalski, whose mascara was running and whose hands hadn't stopped shaking since the gun left her temple. Amara opened her fist, looked at the coin. KA on the back, the trident on the front. 8, she said quietly, almost to herself. Ray closed his eyes, opened them. SEAL Team 8 Africa. He shook his head slowly, the way a man does when a puzzle he's been working on for weeks suddenly assembles itself. I was with 2nd Battalion, 6 Marines in Helmand, Amara 2021. We were pinned down for 16 hours, took casualties, couldn't get air support. He paused. Team 8 pulled us out. 4 operators and a medic. The medic treated my guys under fire for 3 hours while your shooters held the line. He looked at her. That was your team. Amara said nothing, but her chin trembled. Once a single, almost invisible movement that she suppressed instantly, the way you suppress something that's been held down for years and suddenly finds a crack in the wall. Ray straightened in his wheelchair. His back screamed at him. He ignored it. Then Gunnery Sergeant Raymond Delroy, United States Marine Corps, retired, a man who had not saluted anyone since his discharge ceremony 6 years ago, raised his right hand to his forehead and rendered a salute. Full crisp textbook, a Marine saluting a Navy SEAL. Seraphi Senior Chief. The words hit the room like a second gunshot. But this one didn't break anything. This one built. Harold Park moved first, 70 years old, blood on his face, hands arthritic and trembling. He pushed himself up from the floor, braced himself against a chair, and raised his hand. A Korean War veteran salute, shaking, imperfect, and absolutely unbreakable. Then Darius Webb, still on the floor, one shoulder bandaged, the other arm rising. His salute was sloppy and his eyes were wet, and he didn't care. The Vietnam vets. One standing, one bracing on the chair arms to get up. 2 salutes from men who'd been saluting since before Amara's parents left. Acre the other veterans. One by one, those who could stand stood. Those who couldn't stand saluted from where they were. Wheelchairs, gurneys, plastic waiting room chairs, a room full of warriors from 3 wars and 5 decades. Saluting a woman they'd been calling the new girl for 12 weeks. Amara's vision blurred. She blinked hard twice. She would not cry. She was Senior Chief Petty Officer Osei-Mensah, call sign Cobra, United States Navy. And she would not, she cried, not sobs, not a breakdown. Just 2 tears tracking down her cheeks in parallel lines, which she wiped with the back of her hand, in a single sharp motion. The way she'd always done in every place where crying was a luxury she couldn't afford. Then a hand settled on her shoulder from behind. She turned. Rita Sandoval stood there. The old Master Chief had removed her volunteer badge. Underneath it, pinned to her blouse, was a Navy anchor, the insignia of a Chief Petty Officer, polished and golden and older than half the people in the room. I knew, Rita said quietly. The first day. The way you checked the exits. Amara stared at her. Rita extended her hand. Not for a handshake, for a forearm clasp, the grip that operators use. Warrior to warrior. Master Chief Rita Sandoval, USS Baton, 1987 to 2017, 30 years, 8 deployments. She smiled. Welcome home, sailor. Amara took her forearm, gripped it, held it, and for the first time in 3 years, the ground beneath her feet stopped moving. The aftermath came in waves. The first wave was police, Boston PD, SWAT, FBI, a chaos of badges and jurisdictions and statements. Amara gave her statement calmly, completely, and with the clinical precision of someone trained in after-action reports. The detective interviewing her paused mid-sentence, looked at her and said, "You've done this before." It wasn't a question. The second wave was media. Someone had been recording on their phone during the attack, not the disarm. But the aftermath, the salute, the room of veterans standing. The video hit Twitter before the police tape was down. By evening, it had 14 million views. By morning, it was national news. The third wave was accountability. The investigation into how 4 armed men walked through a broken metal detector in a VIA hospital led straight to Gerald Wickham's 4th floor office. Federal auditors descended on Veterans Memorial like the wrath of God. The self-dealing contracts were uncovered within 72 hours. 3 million in VA hospital funds redirected to Whiteham's own construction company through a web of shell LLCs so transparent that the lead investigator later called it the least sophisticated fraud I've seen in 20 years. The Wickham Veterans Wellness Center was canceled. The money, every cent, was redirected to ER renovation, security infrastructure, and staff expansion. Gerald Wickham was removed from the board of directors and arrested at his home in Newton on federal fraud charges. In his mug shot, he wasn't smiling. Marcus Devlin and his 3 associates were charged with armed robbery, assault with a deadly weapon, and a list of federal offenses related to targeting a VA facility. Devlin, during processing, was told that the nurse who disarmed him was a Navy SEAL. According to the booking officer, He sat very still for a long time and then asked for a lawyer. But the wave Amara hadn't expected, the one that took her off guard, came from Denise Kowalski. It happened 3 days after the attack in the break room at 6 in the morning. Amara was there first, drinking the terrible hospital, because her good stuff was at home, and she hadn't been sleeping enough to remember to bring it. The harbor was gray through the window. The Constitution was invisible in the fog. Denise came in. She looked like she hadn't slept either. No makeup, no clipboard, no union badge. She stood in the doorway for a long time. "Ms. Marine," she said. Her voice was stripped bare. No professionalism, no armor. Fallujah 2004. He came back different. He doesn't talk about it. Doesn't talk about much, actually. She sat down. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat on the table. "I've spent 30 years in this hospital. 30 years watching nurses come and go. And I built walls. I built rules. I told myself it was about standards, about protecting this place, about making sure people earned their spot." She looked at Amara. "But I think maybe I was just afraid of the new ones. The ones who might be better than me. The ones who reminded me that I'm." She stopped, swallowed. "I don't have an excuse for how I treated you. I have an apology, and I know the difference." Amara sat with that for a moment. She thought about Wami. She thought about the riverbed. She thought about all the people who'd been unkind to her in 3 months, and all the people who'd been unkind to her in 12 years, and all the ways that unkindness accumulates in a body like shrapnel, not killing you, just making everything harder. "Your son," she said. "What's his name?" "Danny. If Danny ever wants to talk to someone who gets it, someone who's been there, I'm here." She paused. "Not as a nurse, as someone who knows what it's like to come home and not be home." Denise's eyes filled. She nodded. Once that was enough. In the weeks that followed, the Navy contacted Amara. Would she consider returning? The SEAL combat medic training pipeline was expanding. They needed instructors with her experience. The offer was significant: rank restoration, back pay, a position at the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado. The hospital administrator, the new one, not Wickham, offered her a promotion, trauma team lead, a title, a raise, an office. Amara turned down both. She stayed. Same hospital, same shift, same ER, but she stopped hiding. She Tawi's challenge coin off the chain around her neck and clipped it to her badge lanyard, where it hung in the open, visible to anyone who looked. She stopped wearing scrubs a size too large. She stopped apologizing for things that weren't her fault, and she started something new. She called it the Bridge Program, a peer support group for veterans transitioning into civilian healthcare careers. Nurses, techs, EMTs, anyone who'd served and was struggling with the particular disorientation of going from a world where your training could save lives to a world where nobody knew you had training at all. The first meeting had 6 people. By the 3rd month it had 40. Denise Kowalski helped her set it up. They made an odd pair, the 30-year veteran nurse and the SEAL combat medic turned rookie. But they shared something now. Not friendship, exactly. Recognition. The understanding that walls can be torn down from the inside. On a Thursday morning, 6 weeks after the attack, Amara was in the break room at dawn. Harbor through the window, Constitution emerging from the fog like a ghost ship, all masts and rigging in old wood, quiet and permanent and beautiful. Wheels in the hallway. Ray Delacroix appeared in the doorway, crossword in his lap. He was supposed to have been discharged 2 weeks ago. He kept finding reasons to come back for appointments. 9-letter word for stubborn, he said. Obstinate. I've told you this 4 times. Doesn't fit. He wheeled in, parked next to her, poured himself a coffee. You know, I've been trying to figure out your call sign. She looked at him, smiled. The real smile. The one that lit up her whole face, the one that nobody at Veterans Memorial had seen until the day she stopped being invisible. Cobra. Ray laughed. A real full from the belly laugh that echoed off the breakroom walls and down the hall, and probably woke up a patient or 2. Of course it is. He shook his head. Of course it is. She handed him a coffee. He took it. 2 warriors, 1 Marine, 1 SEAL, 1 in a wheelchair, and 1 in scrubs drinking terrible hospital coffee in a VA hospital in Boston while the sun came up over the harbor. Hey, Cobra. Yeah. The word's not obstinate. He turned the crossword toward her. Look at the clue again. 9-letter word for stubborn with a T in the 5th position. She looked at the puzzle. Read the cross clues. Trace the letters. Tenacious. She said tenacious. He wrote it in. It fit. Yeah, that's the one. That night, Amara called her father. Amara Osei-Mensah, 61, Ghanaian immigrant taxi driver in Washington, D.C. A man who had crossed an ocean to give his children a life and never once complained about what it cost him. She didn't tell him about the attack. She didn't tell him about the seals or the coins or the salutes. She told him she was staying in Boston. She told him she'd found a place. She told him she was okay. Really okay. Not the fake okay she'd been selling for 3 years. There was a pause, the particular pause of a father who knows his daughter better than she thinks. "Well, why, Oma," he said in Twi, the language of home. "You are brave." She closed her eyes, held the phone against her ear, listened to her father breathe. He didn't know the half of it. He didn't need to. Outside her apartment window, the city of Boston settled into night. Somewhere across the harbor, the U.S. Constitution sat in its berth, old and strong and still afloat, carrying the weight of every sailor who'd ever served on its decks. Still here after 200 years, because some things are built to last. At Honey 47 on a Tuesday morning, 4 armed men walked through a broken metal detector and into a room full of veterans. They expected fear. They expected compliance. They expected a soft target. What they found was a woman named Amara Osei-Mensah, who had spent 12 years saving lives in places that don't appear on maps and 3 years trying to forget she knew how. A woman who carried a dead friend's coin in her pocket and a lullaby in her throat and a strength she'd been hiding, because she thought hiding was the same as healing. It isn't. Sometimes life teaches us that belonging isn't about where you came from or what you did or what name they knew you by. It's about the moment you stop pretending to be less than you are and let the people around you see the whole picture. The scars and the skills and the grief and the grace. All of it. Some families are born. Others are forged in break rooms and hospital corridors and terrible coffee shared between strangers who turn out to be the same kind of different. Amara Osei-Mensah spent 12 years being Cobra. She spent 2 years trying to be nobody. She spent 3 months being the new girl. Turns out she was just Amara, and she was enough. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a feeling, a belief that the quiet ones carry more than we know, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you're a veteran or you love one, know this. The uniform comes off, but the warrior never does.